Well, Casey, the other big AI news of the past couple weeks is that the talent war for AI engineers and researchers has gotten even hotter. Now, we talked a few weeks ago about how Meta and its superintelligence team were out there making offers of reportedly as much as $100 million to certain AI researchers to come join their team. But that was not the end of it. Since then, we have heard about many more offers being made, in some cases successfully, to lure people to Meta. But we are also hearing about other companies that are paying top dollar for what they consider premium AI talent.
Yeah, and we want to talk about this today for a couple reasons. One is just in the past couple of weeks, there has been a notable shift in talent, and I would say most importantly, away from OpenAI and toward Meta. We want to talk about that. We also want to talk about an acquisition that has really gotten Silicon Valley talking. It seems to break a lot of our assumptions about how Silicon Valley works, and I think it may have implications for the rest of us as AI becomes a bigger and bigger force in the economy.
So we have to start with this Windsurf deal and all of the drama around it, because this was really messy. This was a very complicated story that had a lot of twists and turns, and people who are very invested in the AI industry got very worked up about it. I got several texts during my vacation from people being like, can you explain this Windsurf thing to me? So Casey, can you explain this Windsurf thing to me?
Yeah, so Windsurf is a startup that offers an AI-powered coding tool, what software engineers would call an integrated development environment, or IDE, and it essentially helps you autocomplete your coding tasks. You may have heard about Cursor, another company in this space that frankly has been a lot more successful. Well, Windsurf is also in that space, and in April, Bloomberg reported that OpenAI was in talks to buy them for around $3 billion, which would have been the second biggest acquisition that OpenAI has made after its acquisition of Johnny Ive's IO company. But it fell through. And one reason has to do with the relationship that Microsoft and OpenAI have. Their deal is supposed to give Microsoft access to OpenAI's IP. OpenAI was hoping that would not be the case if they bought Windsurf for various reasons. So anyway, the thing fell through.
Right, but that is not the end of the Windsurf saga, because after the acquisition by OpenAI fell through, Google jumped in and said, we'll not acquire Windsurf, but we will acquire some key people from Windsurf. It was announced last Friday that they were spending $2.4 billion to license some of Windsurf's technology and bring over some of their key people, including their CEO, Varun Mohan, and a co-founder, Douglas Chen. This is one of these kind of, non-acqui-hires, or some people have started calling these blitz hires, basically, where instead of going out and buying a startup and getting all of their employees and their IP and their brand and whatever, you sort of cherry pick a few people that you want and pay them a ton of money to kind of leave behind the kind of desiccated husk of the startup to someone else. This is something that happened with Inflection AI when they sort of went over to Microsoft. It's something that has happened a couple other times, including the co-founders of Character AI, who got hired back into Google in a deal much like this one. So this was not a novel kind of deal, but I think one that we're starting to see more and more of.
Yeah, and what made this one different is that a lot of people kind of freaked out about it, because they said, it seems like the basic contract that Silicon Valley has operated under for decades, which said if you are an employee of a startup and you stick with it until an acquisition, you will get rich. All of a sudden, that doesn't look true anymore, because more and more, for reasons that we can get into, companies like Google, the acquirers, are saying, well, maybe we don't acquire the whole company. We know you got a lot of dogs in that company. Let's just go get the good people, and everybody else out on their backs.
Yeah, and so there was some question about people at Windsurf who were not poached by Google, whether they were going to get completely screwed by this deal. And it appeared for a while that they might be getting screwed, basically, being left behind at the kind of shell of the company. But then recently, Cognition AI, another AI startup, came in and acquired the sort of remaining people and sort of assets at Windsurf. We don't know the exact terms of that deal, but it seems like everyone kind of got a decent outcome here, especially the people who went over to Google who got, lots and lots of money to do that.
Yeah. So, it worked out really well, it seems like, for the Windsurf employees in this case after there was an outcry. But again, it's not going to work out this well for everyone. There was a story on Wednesday that Scale AI, which also went through one of these kind of blitz hiring deals where Alexander Wang went to Meta, they announced they're laying off 200 people. And so I suspect, Kevin, that this sort of thing, while it seems like the worst case scenario was avoided in the Windsurf case, we are going to start seeing more and more.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger picture takeaways here is that the kind of war for AI talent is not going away, right? Katie Baker wrote a great piece over at The Ringer about the sort of comparisons between what happens during free agency season in sports leagues and what's happening in AI now. It does kind of feel like the tech industry is having its own kind of free agency period where people are going out and seeing what they're worth. They're getting these like eye-popping offers. I think sometimes the scale of these offers can sort of all blur, but like if you are being paid $100 million at an AI company like Meta to work on this technology, you are making more than the CEOs of almost every Fortune 500 company, at least before, stock payouts and stuff like that. Like, you are making more than the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, made last year. And so this really is like a quite historically unusual thing.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to the fact that there are a handful of trade secrets that if they were able to get into the hands of a Mark Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk or someone else in the second tier of AI labs, you may be able to vault yourself into the first tier and make trillions of dollars.
Yeah, I have to say, I have gone through something of an evolution on this point. When I first started hearing these numbers out of Meta, talking about paying $100 million to individual AI researchers to come over and do this thing, I thought that seems insane. No single person or engineer or researcher, no matter how talented they are, is worth $100 million. But then, I've been doing interviews for my book on AGI, and I've been hearing these stories out of these labs about the scale and the stakes of these training runs for these large models. And it no longer seems so crazy to me. Because what you have now are essentially companies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, or in some cases billions of dollars, on these gigantic models that are trained in these sort of, hundreds of megawatt clusters of supercomputers. They're building these even bigger clusters of supercomputers. The scale of money and investment going into these AI systems is unlike anything we've ever seen before in the tech industry. And you'll hear these stories coming out of these AI labs about a single engineer who found some bug during a training run and saved the whole thing from catastrophe. Or on the flip side, you'll hear about a company wasting hundreds of millions of dollars, or even in one case, I heard a rumor there was a big company that wasted $1 billion or more on a failed training run. And then you start to think, oh, I understand why to a company like Meta, the right AI talent is worth $100 million, because that sort of level of expertise doesn't exist that widely outside of this very small group of people. And if this person does their job well, they can save your company something more like $1 billion, and maybe that means that you should pay them $100 million.
Absolutely. Here's what I will say. If you listen to Hard Fork, none of this should surprise you. Like, what have we been saying for the last year? It is that to people at the leading labs, they believe that this will be something very close to a winner-take-all game, and that the first person who is able to achieve AGI will be able to reap the majority of the benefit. Now, we don't know if that is true, but the entire industry is reshaping itself around that idea. So it is no surprise to me that Mark Zuckerberg found himself behind and said, well, I'm sitting on giant piles of cash. Why don't I use it to try to ensure that I'm not the loser in this race?
Totally. I also think there's an interesting antitrust angle here. People started pointing out after this whole Windsurf saga that this was, in some sense, a response to the aggressive antitrust enforcement that went on during the Biden administration, where Lena Khan and others were sort of making it very difficult for these tech giants to acquire promising young startups. And so the tech industry, in response, sort of found this sort of way of doing of acquiring the key talent without acquiring the whole company, and that in some ways this is sort of a perverse result of the Biden administration's aggressive antitrust enforcement. Do you buy that?
I think that, yes, that is how it started. Some of these, blitz hires or acquisitions, I've heard them called, did take place during the Biden years, including the character AI one, the inflection one at Microsoft. There was a company called Adept that Amazon sort of acquired in this way. And so, yes, that is kind of how it started. And I think that in some sense, that dynamic continues today. It is not obvious to me that the Trump administration would greenlight every acquisition that a Google or a Meta would try to make. We have already seen the Trump administration place onerous conditions on certain mergers. For example, saying you have to eliminate all of your DEI programs if you want us to approve this merger. So it's no surprise to me that a company like Google or Meta is saying, hey, we want to avoid that to the extent possible. And also, by the way, if we only get the top handful of people at this company, we can probably save ourselves a lot of money along the way.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense that the top people in this very lucrative and capital-intensive industry are making tons and tons of money. What I'm less sure about is how it changes the culture of a company if you suddenly have people who are just sort of like sitting alongside colleagues who are making many multiples less than they do. I actually don't I've never worked in a company like that. I don't think colleagues who are making $100 million a year at the New York Times. And so I just don't know how it would change the culture of a company like Meta to all of a sudden have these extremely public cases of people being paid many multiples of what their colleagues are making.
So
what do you think?
I'm so glad you brought this up because over the break, Kevin, Callie Wong, our former colleague at the New York Times and one-time Hard Forecast, had a great story in The Information where she got a hold of a memo that had been sent by a researcher in Meta's generative AI organization. And this scientist said some pretty harsh things, including, and I'll quote here, "I have yet to meet someone in Meta Gen AI that truly enjoys being here, someone that feels like they want to stay in Meta for a long time because it's such a great place. You'll be hard-pressed to find someone that really believes in our AI mission. To most, it's not even clear what our mission is." So this echoes a lot of sentiment that we have heard in reporting about the culture in Meta's AI org, which is that morale is low, people are burned out, there is jealousy and resentment among those who have not been picked to go join the superintelligence lab. So absolutely, I think they are going to have culture problems because this post was written before all of the new centimillionaires came into the company and started to develop their new plans. So, yeah, I will be very curious to see how Alexander Wang manages that.
Yeah, and I think the worst case scenario for Mark Zuckerberg and Meta is that they spend, billions of dollars assembling this sort of superintelligence lab, and then these sort of people who came there in part for the massive sums of money they were being paid, just don't end up being the secret sauce that gets them, vaulted ahead of where they were and into this sort of top tier of AI talent. That people just sort of cash out. They see it as kind of an early retirement strategy. I'm going to go there. I'm going to, do some stuff that I used to do at OpenAI, but for this new company, I'm going to collect my giant paycheck and buy a couple houses and not worry that much about my future.
Yeah, and the question is just, whatever the next set of breakthroughs turns out to be in AI, how easily can they be copied, right? Meta, for the most part, is a fast-following organization. They do not innovate. They let other people innovate, and they say, how can we do that too? If it turns out that they can do that too, I think this new superintelligence team is going to be great for them. If it turns out that, no, you actually need a series of breakthroughs, and the people they hired aren't the people who come up with those, then they're going to be in trouble.
Yep.
Let me say one other thing about this style of acquiring people. Here's what I think is interesting about this, Kevin. One way of looking at this situation is the big AI labs took a look at the leadership of a company like Windsurf, and they said, these handful of people are super valuable. In fact, more valuable than they've ever been. Mark Zuckerberg is doing the same thing with AI researchers at various companies, and they are getting all of the spoils when these companies make the acquisitions to the detriment of the other employees who work there. My fear is this is actually a preview of the AI economy. That as AI becomes a more powerful force in more companies, it is going to reduce the number of people at a company who are presumed to be valuable. And those people will make a lot more money. But if you are not part of the elect there, then you might be out of luck. So that, I think, is something to watch as we move forward, is the sort of distorting force of AI that at every single company, it makes a handful of people way more valuable and everyone else appear less valuable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And I also wonder if it sort of increases the incentive to kind of toot your own horn or exaggerate your own contributions when you are at one of these startups, because when the Google or the Microsoft or the other, giant acquirer comes looking to sort of cherry pick the sort of quote unquote best talent, you want them to notice you and shower you with money and not just sort of like relegate you to the sort of dying husk of the company that's left behind. It does create some sort of interesting internal pressures where before you might have said like of your startup, like, we are all one team, we are going to like succeed or fail together. Now these giant sort of cherry picking operations coming in and saying, we're going to give you guys billions of dollars and the rest of you are out of luck. I think that does really change the culture of a company.
By the way, this does seem like kind of a jerk move from the founders. You know, it's like, if you have hired all of these people, there has been this implicit promise that you will be taken care of in the event of an acquisition. And we're just now seeing founder after founder saying, I'm actually just going to take the $1 billion. And I want to thank everybody for the time that you've spent at this company. And I wish you well in your future endeavors. But as for me, you can catch me on the yacht.
Yeah, I think it is a very bad precedent to set. And I'm sort of surprised that it was done in the way that it did. I'm glad, Cognition came in the end, and like everyone in the Windsurf thing seems like they're going to get a decent outcome at least. But yeah, man, if I had like quit my job to like go work for a startup that had a sort of uncertain future ahead of it, and I work really hard, and as a result, the company succeeds and ends up getting acquired, but I don't get acquired, like I'm gonna be so sour and jaded after that experience. I'm probably not gonna work for a startup again.
Wow, Kevin Roose, sour and jaded. What would that be like to work with? I hope I never find out. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.